special guest today, everyone. I'll just keep talking here for a second as people join in, but just a little intro here. Obviously, Joe, some people like to join my stream for. I'm perhaps the person that swings the most intensely in the world between Bitcoin and Ukraine support. So it's a weird niche. And, we have, obviously, Europeans are very, very favorable to supporting Ukraine, I think, generally. But as we get farther west, where you and I are originally from, where we grew up, it gets harder. And I saw Joe, who I'll introduce here in a sec. I saw him first time was a couple months ago on, I think it was Professor Gerdis's pod. And then I saw you recently on Jonathan Fink's show. And I just really like the cut of your jib. We're talking just about supporting Ukraine. It's a difficult topic for, everybody. Everybody's busy. Everybody's got their own schedules, and the world is so polarized. We get in our echo chambers. Everybody knows all the grand scheme of how this stuff goes. But when it comes to Ukraine, obviously this is a super major war that's been going on for 3.5 years, but actually, over 10 years in Europe. And it's unbelievable how under the microscope this war is. A lot of people say the war in Gaza was the first sort of war on Twitter. It's, although there's certainly a lot of truth to that. Really, it was in Ukraine was the first one. And this war has just changed everything. I mean, we're talking about the cost of defense, the weapons that you're used to defense, the weapons that you use for offense. It's a totally different war. Yet, if you put this stuff out in the space to people that are not really focusing on Ukraine like you and I are every day, it's pretty polarizing, right? You and I know this. People think it's Biden's war. People think it's a fake war. Still, people in the U.S. in particular, they get very much pulled in these polarized directions from folks like Tucker Carlson. So I just want to say kind of where I'm coming from, again, as someone who admittedly, I have a tough audience when I talk about Ukraine, right? Because, I was just on a big show, my buddy Marty Bent's show. It's called TFTC last week. And every time I bring up Ukraine, I know that to my audience, I sound strident. I sound like I'm talking down to them. I'm talking about, how I want to raise their awareness, what's happening in Ukraine, their support, and I was in a particular mood last week. If people haven't heard it, they'll clearly hear where we were right. Folks like you and I were right. People that follow Ukraine were right. Trump came into this and he said he was going to end the war in a day. He said that many times. It hasn't happened. And he has been very well. Actually, before I go to that, let's not go too deep there. The bottom line is what I heard from you, and I'll finally say hi here in a second, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself to my audience as we start to stream in here. But what I've heard from you is like a balanced view. It's something where obviously you're trying to reach across the aisle. This is not, this should be bipartisan in the American context. Outside in the European context, it should be something that every European cares about. I mean, Ukrainians are literally fighting for, Ukrainians to go on vacation at the moment. It's unbelievable. But your view has just been really nice in my mind because you're trying to reach across the aisle. You're trying to not talk down to people. You're trying to not be strident. And I think that's hard today when this disinformation space, which is coming at us so strong from the Russian side. So with that, having said all that, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on. It's nice to meet you. And maybe you could just tell us a little bit about what you're doing in Ukraine.
Yeah, thank you, Matthew, for that introduction. And I'm Joe Lindsley, JP Lindsley here in Kyiv, and I ended up here sort of accidentally in the pandemic, which I can explain in a minute. But for the first 3 years of Russia's full-scale invasion, I reported every single weekday. I never took a day off from February 24th, 2022 until right about last Christmas on Chicago's WGN radio. And through that experience, I fought to keep that show active every day, and I was really, after a couple months, when the attention started to fade on Ukraine in 2022, I realized that if I was going to keep that audience, I really had to understand the moods of those who are listening and people who are driving to work in Chicago, for example, to keep them engaged on Ukraine. And so that exercise of daily reporting, 10 minutes live every day, uh, forced me to create this real understanding of what people are caring about in the U.S. And in a way that would make listening to stories from Ukraine fit into their lives. And so I think, and sadly, I lost that show. It was canceled by the corporate overlords right before Christmas. But I've continued to stay here and report in different ways. I was on Ben Shapiro's show a few days ago, and anything I can to share this reality, and especially because Matthew, I think, and I put myself through this thought exercise, but if I had never been to Ukraine, the first time I came here, I was passing through in 2018 while I was traveling around the world. And if I had never come to Ukraine, I very well would be a huge, Ukraine skeptic in the U.S. And I think in large part because I started my career working for the people who push for foreign wars. I started at the Weekly Standard as a cub reporter. And then I was sort of subsumed into the world of Rupert Murdoch and Roger Ailes. I became protege to Ailes when I was about 23, 24. And I saw all of that political and media manipulation and mess up close, and I rejected it. I quit. I gave up my career at Fox. I actually escaped in a car chase through the Hudson Valley because they thought I knew too much, and I really rejected everything about the way high level American media, politics, and the war machine functions. And along with friends who had served in Iraq and Afghanistan, we all began to figure this out together and say, wait a second, we really reject our foreign policy in particular. And so because I had was sort of burned by American politics and American foreign policy, if I had never been to Ukraine, I quite easily would be a huge skeptic now because I wouldn't see any reasons to believe otherwise. And so that experience for me helps me, I think, relate to many hardworking Americans who don't see what Ukraine really is.
Yeah, yeah, I like that. Quickly, what was the high speed car chase? Have you gone into that? I'm sure you've gone into that before, but
Well, so Roger Ailes, who was the founder of Fox News, and he was sort of the visionary that helped get Nixon elected and Reagan and H.W. Bush. He was my mentor, and he was teaching me to run the company. It was quite strange, but I was pulled into that world of high level media and politics, and because Roger saw something of him in me, I had the same anger that was necessary to sort of get ahead, and so he was teaching me in a way how he knew how to listen to the mood of America and then manipulate it in the direction that he wanted. And it all seemed great, but I went into media and journalism because I believe in pursuing the truth. And after really about a year working with Roger at Fox and other places there, I began to see that there was a permanent conflict with the truth. The truth was only incidental. Power mattered more, and I was being tested to see if I would be willing to make things up for the company and for the mission there. So this became a conflict, and it was a whole long story. That there was Showtime made a TV series where Russell Crowe played my boss Roger, and some actor played me. It's Hollywood, so the details are not all precise, but the idea is there. And so one day I said I got to get out of here, and so I quit. But it's like the mafia. And Roger said, "Well, you can't quit because we told you everything." Uh, and so I was stuck there for a while, and then one day I got in my Jeep and I just escaped through the Hudson Valley. And Roger's security team and henchmen were following me, and it was madness. They tried to ruin me in many ways. They went after my family, everything they could. And so it was quite a tough experience. But I knew I had to separate myself from that world. And interestingly, if I had stayed there and stayed at Fox, who knows what I would have become. But I think I would have been a very bad voice for truth, and especially now we see what's happening here in Ukraine. And I'm very grateful that my journey brought me here in an unexpected way. Where, because one thing I hated when I was working on Avenue of the Americas, at the News Corp Tower, is that we were so disconnected from the world. We had all this power to share and tell stories and to pursue truth and investigations, and we were so removed from everything that was happening in the world. And here I am. I mean, often I spend time in the city of Kharkiv, 30 miles from Russia, and places closer to the front. And so I couldn't be closer to what's happening here. And that's exactly why I always wanted to be a journalist. And the reason why I'm in Ukraine before the pandemic, I was traveling around the world, and I had been in Sweden, and I flew to Lviv in Western Ukraine to join to give a lecture on media. People that had seen that TV show in Ukraine wanted me to talk about my experience leaving Fox, and so I flew here. I planned to be here for 2 weeks, and the borders closed for the pandemic, and my flight was canceled, of course. And obviously, I had chances to get out of here, but I quickly realized that during that crazy time, Ukraine was going to be one of the freest places in the world.
Yeah.
And it was actually, my health got stronger. I never got COVID, and it was a free, open society for the most part during the pandemic. And so I stayed the entire time. January 2022, as it was the life was coming back to normal around the world. I was preparing to go back to the U.S. after being here for 2 years. But we knew what was going to happen. The Russian troops were lining up. We knew that this war was coming. And I said, I've had a good time here. Now it's time for me to get back to a purpose and a mission. And so I resolved to stay here to face the invasion. And partly because of that daily report on WGN, I had that loyal audience every day. So I stayed, and now it's been 5 years here in Ukraine. I'm hoping to stay here until victory is achieved.
Yeah. Wow. That's so interesting. I'll have to check out the documentary or the film or whatever it is. But it sounds a little bit like Scientology there. Wouldn't let you go. And there's a lot of, there's a lot of this Kool-Aid going around. And so let's just bring it in right away then to what I kind of want to focus on to start is sort of the way that you're trying to approach people across the aisle or both sides of the aisle, particularly in the United States. But I think this works, for Western Europeans. I think this works well, that sort of message that you're sending. But, the hardest thing now is we're so polarized. And in the Bitcoin space, it's, of course, there are many MAGA types in the Bitcoin space. I would certainly disavow that if anyone thought that I would be that. But what Bitcoin offers, just going to use this example for you, is it offers a taste of freedom, kind of like the freedom that you said in Ukraine after, during COVID, where you literally don't have to ask anybody for permission, right? Like you can withdraw your coins. You don't have to ask anybody for permission. You can take your coins across borders. You can have your coins in your mind, or you can have them backed up in multiple places. You can do all sorts of amazing things with Bitcoin. This is not going to be a show about Bitcoin, but there's a lot of freedom in Bitcoin. There's also a lot of disinformation to people outside of Bitcoin, because when even the name of my show is called Crypto Voices. I've had it for years. I'm probably the last Bitcoin show that still has the word crypto in the title, because the word crypto is a really bad word in Bitcoin. And I understand it because, you get all these scams. Trump himself and Melania, they have two scam coins, these meme coins. It basically has no point other than to pump out of the brand or the name, and there's literally no function for the coin. But Bitcoin, of course, is very different. It's very deep. If you looked into the history of Bitcoin, you could see, not only cryptography and ideas that go back to the 70s, but you can see ideas of freedom, sort of doing your own thing. And it's fresh air. It really is fresh air. That's sort of, I just want to get that out for you to understand that to some of the people that are listening to this show right now that maybe haven't heard of you. But what I saw with what you were saying on these shows was really important, because there is a lot of cheerleading in this war, and there's a lot of Democrats, I think, just supporting Ukraine for Ukraine's sake. I'm not saying I don't welcome their support, but it's just, we now have a Republican administration. We now have a different direction for the country. The country, regardless of what you think about America, it's the hegemonic gorilla in the world, certainly militarily, and that's even been proven more after the last 3.5 years of the second best army in Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So What have you been trying to do? Again, to sort of reach out to people that I'm interested in speaking with. And how have you been talking about? I've heard the example of Burisma. Maybe we can go through that. I think that's a good one. We could talk about anything, but I'm just curious sort of what your strategy has been as of late to try to bring, the crew around that's just not part of the typical Ukraine fan base. And frankly, we just don't know about it, don't want to learn about Ukraine.
Yeah, well, I think, and I like the crypto analogy because people can not know about. They can have a perception. You can have a perception of something, and you think you know about it, and you're sort of biased against it until there's something that changes your perspective. And I think this is very critical, especially now this week. I mean, right now, we're expecting an announcement today on what Trump is going to do. Is he changing his policy on Ukraine? And what I've been saying to everyone here in Ukraine is that no matter what is announced today, it's important. You have to help Trump make the case to MAGA because I think Trump as president can see what is at stake and he can see the potential of Ukraine, but he still has to make the case to the American people, and that's why he's president because he listens to the people. And and this is something I because I sort of had been in that world, I came from that world. I deeply listened to those who were skeptical about Ukraine because I know that so many American, especially conservative Americans, if they came here and those who do come here love this society, like the city of Kharkiv, which I mentioned. There's a reason why I go there a lot. I mean, it's pretty scary a lot. The Russians bomb it pretty much every night with drones and missiles. 30 miles from Russia, and by day it's a lovely city. It's got lower crime than Los Angeles or Chicago. The kids walk to school on their own. The parks are clean, and it's full of entrepreneurs. And then this is such a wonderful society. The churches are crowded, especially if you go to Western Ukraine. I don't think you'd find a more sort of actively Catholic place in Europe outside of the Vatican, besides Lviv, Ukraine. And no one sees these stories. And I realize the reason why is because Americans have some blinders based on a rightful distrust of Washington. And so my focus has been on helping to remove these blinders by reporting the facts and the truth. And I know that every time, for example, every time someone like Lindsey Graham or John Bolton says they support Ukraine, I cringe because I because they were such cheerleaders for Iraq. Whatever they say, I understand why Americans say I'm going to do the opposite. And it's the same with some of the Democrats that wave the flag for Ukraine. And so, but I see that the cause of Ukraine is separate from those guys. And so that's why I take, for example, which I report very often, this notion of Burisma. When I go in a lot of MAGA podcasts and I debate with people in a cordial way about Ukraine, and I realize at the core, the biggest obstacle to believing in that anything good about Ukraine is this one word, Burisma. And I think this would resonate with your audience probably because everyone has heard the story, like that Joe Biden's son made money from Burisma, and people think because everyone from Tucker Carlson to the BBC calls Burisma a Ukrainian company, and so the narrative is okay. Well, Burisma was Ukrainian, and it paid money to Hunter Biden, and so no wonder Joe Biden sent billions of dollars to Ukraine. And that okay, if that was all true, then I would understand the skepticism. But the extraordinary fact is, which the Democrats don't want to report, and which Republicans don't want to listen to so far, is that Burisma is actually Russian. And I think as I've seen when I explain this story to people, it doesn't make them all of a sudden supporters of Ukraine, but at least they start to see that this is not what they thought it was. And in it's really extraordinary events in 2014, Ukraine had its revolution of dignity, which, as I know it, it was like the Ottawa truckers protest times a million. It was not a top-down CIA created thing; it was a grassroots movement.
I was
I
there
know so
as
many
a
people
I
who
was
were
there as
part
a
of it.
CIA
You were
agent.
there.
As a CIA agent, of course.
Oh,
Visiting
with
visit.
Victoria Nuland.
Yes, handing out cookies. No, I was not doing that. I was just visiting friends. I have lots of friends in Ukraine, and I was there. It was incredible to see. Incredible.
Yeah, I think, and it's hard for people to believe that there could be such a successful movement, and I think that's why people are skeptical of it. I mean, you look at I mean, it's very sad to consider what happened in Hong Kong. the people of Hong Kong were inspired by Ukraine's Maidan revolution, and now it's all gone. China stopped it because they saw it was a threat. And this what's happening today. Every time we have ballistic missiles landing here in Kyiv, for example, that's because of that revolution. It's because the people refuse to be controlled, and this is the price they have to pay for it because Russia doesn't, and all the other elites don't want that to happen. And there's a reason why when all the sort of Team Biden, when they spoke about Ukraine, they never talked about the Maidan revolution. Macron in France never talks about Maidan because he doesn't want that to happen in Paris. And so that's part of the reason why the true story of Ukraine doesn't get out there, because the elites who know that Russia is a threat are also afraid of the wild freedom of the Ukrainians. And so if we just look at the story of Burisma, it was February 24th, 2014. The pro-Kremlin regime fled Ukraine, so the revolution had worked. And in that regime, one of the ministers in the government was the CEO of Burisma. So with the rest of that Yanukovych government, he fled to Russia, and it was from Moscow a few weeks later that he hired Hunter Biden and his business partner Devon Archer from Moscow. And this was actually Devon Archer, who Trump has now pardoned, notably, said this in congressional testimony in 2023. He said, you know what? He said, I never thought about it, but the day I met with Burisma's CEO in Moscow was the day that Putin took Crimea. And so Burisma was part of the pro-Kremlin regime that the Ukrainian people kicked out in 2014. And that regime, along with the Kremlin, was trying to get back control of Ukraine. And so what is one of the first things they do? They hire the son of the vice president of the US. And at the time, Joe Biden, was very different from when he was president. He was sharp. He was in charge in many ways of Obama's foreign policy.
Yep.
That's why he was there. And so the Kremlin is now, their buddy is paying Joe Biden's son. And what does the United States do when Russia takes Crimea? Despite the obligations of the Budapest Memorandum, nothing. And so at the very least, this should open a question and an investigation. What Biden was paid by Moscow, and Biden in 2014 did nothing to help Ukrainians. And then as we look at, during the Biden presidency, and I think this is very important, when I talk to people close to the White House today, they look at Ukraine as unwinnable. They don't see the potential of Ukraine. And my argument is, well, that's because you only see the Ukraine that was restricted by Joe Biden.
Right.
And because time and time again, from 2022 until the end of Biden's presidency, he restricted Ukraine. When Congress finally approved the bipartisan aid package in 2024, Biden took months and months, to send that aid. A lot of it he never sent. He even waited until the hurricanes hit southeastern U.S. to release some of the aid.
Yeah.
And the headlines made it seem like that was new money. And so I understand why Americans were so frustrated. They thought all this money is going to Ukraine. Again, most of it wasn't money. It was a valuation of old equipment. And the Biden administration was never honest about that. They never gave Congress a victory plan. And it's very interesting to note that, for years, Joe Biden's son was making money from Burisma, yes, but Burisma that had fled to Moscow is really the crux of it. And I think one of the most notable things, Matthew, that a lot of people have missed, Jake Tapper of CNN with his book, looking into the Biden administration and who was really in charge, Jake Tapper has been reporting that Hunter Biden was in many ways the de facto chief of staff to Joe Biden. Hunter Biden, who had never been to Ukraine, he worked for Burisma from Moscow. He had Moscow whispering into his ear.
Yep.
He was the closest guy to Joe Biden when Joe Biden was making decisions on Ukraine. And so you can wave the Ukrainian flag all you want, but if you prevent them from winning, whose side are you really on?
Yeah, that's wonderfully laid out. So many things to touch on there, but let's finish the thread on Burisma, because I've had this question myself when you've brought it up. I haven't listened to all your interviews with the MAGA podcast, but it's great that you're talking to them. I imagine a question that they would still have is, well, you said that Ukraine was changing, less corrupt, going to be different, but there's still this company, Burisma, that's Russian-owned, operating in Ukraine, and they're still paying Joe Biden's son, quite infamously. Of course, all that changed in 2022. But how is your explanation of how it sort of went along, right? Because it's a long time from 2014 to 2022. Obviously, Russia had an active campaign. There's a lot of disinformation what they were doing there. People were acting like Russia never broke a ceasefire. They broke, depending on your count, like 100, I don't know, anywhere from 50 to 200 ceasefires during that time. And people talk about the Minsk Accords and all that stuff. I'm bringing it. I always get on these tangents, so let's not talk about the Minsk Accords, but just about Burisma. How do you sort of explain from a Ukrainian's perspective how they've been trying to solve the Burisma problem internally, because there were still, that was still going on inside of the country of Ukraine, was it not? I mean, from 2014, it was from 2014 to 2022, they were paying, the vice president's son at the time, and it eventually only fully sort of the corruption there ended after the full scale, right?
Well, so the moment when Burisma started paying the vice president's son, and firstly, Burisma is registered in Cyprus, so it's a Cypriot company, and it was Ukrainian in the sense that the CEO of the company was Minister of Ecology, which is not corrupt at all, during the Yanukovych regime, and then he was a deputy minister of security when the revolution happened here. But the it was he Burisma only hired Hunter Biden after uh, its CEO and the entire Yanukovych government left Ukraine and fled to Russia, and they were out of power. They were trying to get control of Ukraine and its resources once again. So it was from Moscow. Hunter Biden never came to Kyiv. It was from
Yeah.
Moscow that Hunter was hired, and Burisma had major energy assets in the Crimean Peninsula, so they benefited from Putin being able to take that. Burisma benefited from Joe Biden as Obama's foreign policy guy in 2014, doing nothing to help Ukraine. Only sending basically MREs, not sending weapons. Joe Biden, who allowed Russia to he removed Trump's when he became president, removed Trump's sanctions on Russia for the Nord Stream pipeline, and so it's at least should be a question, and no one has really asked that question because it's so easy to associate Burisma with Ukraine. But that's like saying that Yanukovych is still the Ukrainian president. He's not. That changed. They went to Russia, and it was from Russia that Hunter Biden was hired, and so this should be a starting point to at least reorient our questioning on this. There are efforts over the years to investigate Burisma. It's very messy. Burisma. I've been warned by people here not to touch this topic. People who know that that what I'm saying is accurate, but they say be careful, don't touch it because they're pretty powerful. So that's Burisma has also supported the Atlantic Council, which ostensibly is very much in favor of Ukraine. So their tentacles are in many places, but when it comes to the simple thing, just it is inaccurate and false to say that Hunter Biden was paid by Ukrainians. He was paid by anti-Ukrainian, pro-Kremlin friends from Moscow. That's the first thing to clear up. And I think once you clear that up, you can begin to see to actually make sense of what's happening here and what happened during the Biden years. Why was Biden restricting Ukraine? Well, if Hunter was actually a top advisor, as Jake Tapper reported, it begins to make sense.
Right, right. Very interesting. Well, also very interesting what you said about being a bit dangerous to talk about this company. In light of that, we can move on to other topics, but one more there. What is the current status of Burisma as it operates in Ukraine or has operated in Ukraine, say from the end of 2022 to today?
It seems that it has sort of vanished and dissolved. This is a hard thing to pin down, but there is no, as far as I've been able to see, there is no known entity. The CEO. When remember the famous video of Biden saying, bragging that he had told the Ukrainians, you don't get aid if you don't fire the prosecutor. That prosecutor allegedly was
Trump.
no Biden said this in
Oh, sorry. Right.
when
Yeah.
Biden was vice president. So because it's funny because what everyone accuses Trump of doing in that phone call with Zelensky was actually what Biden did.
Right.
On the other side of this.
Right.
And actually, Matthew, another thing that everyone misses: 2 or 3 days before that July 2019 phone call between Trump and Zelensky. So when the story, the narrative that we remember is that Trump was somehow pressuring Zelensky to investigate Joe Biden, and on this point of Burisma, even though Burisma was not mentioned in that call. Well, 2 or 3 days before that phone call, I think it was July 26th, 2019, the Washington Post had a front page, top of the fold story about the money and the Post said possibly corrupt money that the Bidens were making in Russia and Ukraine. That was the Washington Post headline. 2 or 3 days later, Trump calls Zelensky. And you realize, if you're president of the United States and you have this headline in the Washington Post, which was not favorable to Trump, this is during that Democratic primary in 2019, and it makes complete sense to ask the president of Ukraine about this Washington Post front page story,
Right.
with questions about the money that the Bidens made here, and so that really was the context of it. And the Biden had pressured Ukraine under President Poroshenko to get rid of the prosecutor who it seems was investigating Burisma. It's very hard to pin down the details on that. And after that, Burisma, Zlochevsky was able to kind of warm himself back into Ukrainian society. And this is what you had. You had a lot of, when I first came here in 2018, even in Kyiv, on a basic level, people were speaking Russian. You had lots of Russian influence here that they were sort of creeping back after the revolution of 2014. All of that, of course, changed. Well, not all of it changed, but a lot of it changed with the full-scale invasion.
Yeah, and I think it's a good example of, look, I live in the Baltics here. My listeners know American Latvian heritage, and we've gone through this as well, right? We were part of the Soviet Union. The Baltics in particular, which is a little bit different than Ukraine and Belarus in particular, when you talk about the Soviet Union context, is the Baltics had free constitutions. They had governments. They had a national polity. In Lithuania's case, for hundreds of years, almost a millennia even, in 800 years, you can say. And in the Latvian Estonia's case, at least independently from post-World War I. So we had something to fall back on. We had always wanted to be, obviously it was, no matter what the Russian disinformation is coming for us, by the way. And so I can already warn you that whatever happens here with Ukraine, the next step for them, for sure, they're already doing it, is to try to get more pressure on the Baltics. But anyway, it was very hard in the 90s. And there were a lot of these discussions that are happening right now in Ukraine about getting more, getting corruption down, getting more Western-oriented values, corporate charters, courts, all these things. That was happening in the 90s in the Baltics, and it was very difficult. It was far from painless. There was a lot of, there's a lot of corruption. There was a lot of grifting, and there, you'd have just crazy stories about, they had these things called the KGB bags, where basically the Soviet times, you'd basically tell on your neighbor or your comrade in some Soviet enterprise that, to try to get ahead. And it was very cutthroat and very bad. And obviously it's not how Western rules operate. No matter what anybody wants to poo-poo on the West is just a billion times better than this. So the point is, I've seen it. I know exactly how it happens. And the Baltics have pulled away as fast as we could in the 90s from the Soviet Union or Russia. But then Ukraine is doing that now. And I think, as Sergei Plokhy has written about many times in his great book, this really was a revolution in 2014. The first one was in 2004, also against Yanukovych, if people don't remember. But in 2014, it was really, they took it to the end. They took it. It burns me up when people act like this is some sort of NGO coup, or this is the people in my space, right? They think it's an NGO coup, or like you said, Victoria Nuland handing out cookies. They just don't understand how serious it is to get away from the Russian way of life of absolute just despair and disinformation. So having said that, I think the example of Burisma, I just want to get this point across. The example of Burisma that you said, I think is a very, very good one. And it's a microcosm of many companies that happened this way with Russia. It's a microcosm of just, Ukraine and Belarus even more. But these were two countries contrasted to the Baltics that did not have free societies in the interwar period between World War I and World War II. They tried, they were smoked out by the communists. The communists took over, and that was that. They just did not have it. They could not take it over the edge. And so it really wasn't until 2014 where things started to happen. And with Burisma, it's just a perfect example. And there are many, many more companies like that where people need to understand that, I'll just make one more tangent and then I'll get back to you. Especially now in our online presence, people go to the extremes, right? In the Bitcoin space, there's a lot of hardcore libertarians. A lot of them just hate the government. I'm going to go around the government, whatever. But there is a reality in our world that, Thomas Jefferson said, trade with everyone, treaties with no one, or maybe it was Ben Franklin. But that's just a different world now. I mean, a nuclear loaded missile can get to the United States from Europe in whatever it is, 18 minutes or 22 minutes. So it's just not a world. It's not a world at all where you can just say trade with everyone, alliances with no one. I mean, NATO, no matter what anybody says, I know that NATO's sticking around. I know it's a tough days for NATO with the way that the U.S. role is playing. But this is just something that I think is very hard for people on the right, even people on the center right. They're just so sick of the foreign wars, as you said. They're so sick of it. And it's the worst time. It's the worst time for them to feel fatigue because they have this wonderful European country of 40 million that has fought tooth and nail. They're in their 11th year of a war for independence from an entity that is just not going to stop. They're never going to stop. There's no start date, no end date. You have to defeat them, whether it's militarily, whether it's in whatever we call the hybrid war outside of the military, dealing with all of their hybrid attacks and attacks in the Baltic Sea and the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. So it's a constant battle. And so I think having said all of that, you really have a good message for these people that are just fatigued. They believe in the values of liberty, freedom, but they just don't see that Ukraine is doing that. They might just hear Ukraine and they just think Biden's war, corruption, Burisma. So again, I'm just repeating my points, but I've really enjoyed the way that you're approaching this. I think it's very good. People don't want to be talked down to, and I have trouble with that too. I know, like with Bitcoin, I'm totally cool and chill and just let it be. But with Ukraine, I know that I sound strident if I'm talking to a hostile audience. So how are you approaching it?
Well, for one, I'll say that, and I understand the stridency too. For example, the past 10 days here in Kyiv, there were two nights that I thought were the end. The most recent was it last Wednesday when for almost 3 hours we nonstop. There was not even maybe more than 2 seconds when you did not hear the Iranian designed drones buzzing and exploding and ballistic missiles for almost 3 hours. Every second was filled with that. It was absolute and pure hell. After a night like that, you're good, or during those moments, you're going to be angry, and this applies even to the President Zelensky. This explains a lot of the emotions that people in the West see from Ukraine. People, that attack went on all night, and also the week before, that the Thursday prior to that, and nevertheless, at 8 o'clock in the morning, I'm at my regular coffee shop. No one has slept. Everyone is still showing up. There's no mental health day. There's no snow day for these attacks, but everyone is exhausted. And so, in those moments, you tend to be more strident than I was. I was even texting friends in Washington quite angrily. But generally, I realized that that's not going to be effective. And I don't like the word disinformation, because I think in that word is contained a disrespect for the Americans, and it sort of twists a little bit what Russia's doing. That there's this idea, among European elites and some Americans in the media, that disinformation is just saying something that's false, and idiots believe it. That's not what it is at all. If you tell someone, if you're trying to convince someone of something and you say, well, you just simply believe disinformation, you are actually insulting that person's intelligence and their integrity 100%. And that's what the Russians want us to do. The KGB tactics, this idea of reflexive control theory, which goes back to the early days of the KGB, which the Russians still are very good at practicing, knows how to manipulate people's justified emotions. And so, in the case of Americans are rightly frustrated, I believe, with the war machine, and the failed wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. By the way, Matthew, the past 2 years were the most profitable years for the U.S. defense industry in terms of foreign weapon sales. Because the longer this war goes on, the more countries in Europe get afraid, and the more they see the weapons that work in Ukraine, but then the more they want to buy weapons themselves. And actually, the forever war is the goal of the defense industry. That's not what Ukrainians want. They want to win and make this not a forever war. But the Russians know that they listen to that American mood, which is a righteous mood that's frustrated with the system, and they plug Ukraine into that. And so the trick of disinformation is not just saying sort of saying lies, but it's first understanding a legitimate and justifiable mood in America. And so if you're countering that, you also have to respect that mood, and which I can do because I share that same frustration, that same skepticism of Washington. And one thing that I've said to people in Ukraine that, I wish when President Zelensky met with President Trump in the Oval Office, imagine if he had said this, Mr. President, we know that the American people are sick of Washington, both the Democrats and the Republicans. They don't trust the Washington establishment, and you know what? And this is what I wish Zelensky had said. Neither do we Ukrainians. We don't trust Washington because in the 1990s, the same uniparty, the Democrats and the Republicans, promised Ukraine, hey, give up your nukes, and not just your nukes, but give up your best bombers, all of your weapons, really, and we're going to protect you. And so not only has Washington lied to the American people about Iraq, about UFOs, whatever you want to say, not only has Washington lied to the American people, but Washington has lied to the Ukrainian people. And there you can start to see the real commonality, sort of the mentality of Ukraine's revolution of 2014. And so that's I think it's an honest way to do it, and I think it's the only way to break through the Russian grip on these narratives. You have the starting point has to be listening to the mood of the American people.
Yeah, wonderfully said. What about the idea that it just seems this far right media, which again Tucker Carlson you've mentioned a couple times, he is of course someone who grifted very hard for the Iraq War in 2003. Now it's changed his tune in some neo-religious way. He has he gets clawed by demons at night, and he supports Russia, and he interviews Putin and Lavrov and all these guys, and he loves it. I think it's hard. Like for me, I have no problem, and I will say it because I know so much about both societies. That is, well, even three. Let's say Ukraine, Baltics, and Russia. I have no problem painting the darkness around Russia. Like literally, a quarter of the country doesn't have toilets. They have high HIV rates, some of the highest abortion rates in the world. They're not the traditionalist country that Tucker puts out there. But if I would go negative on Russia, which in my view is the only way. I mean, every single Ukrainian is negative on Russia. It's hard for an American to see that. They're kind of like, well, okay, they're both corrupt. They're both terrible. I'm not going to support them. How do you go there? And why do you think it is that Russia, that someone like a Tucker, obviously is the perfect example. Is he just doing it for clicks that he supports Russia so much, that he goes to Russia, that he interviews Putin and Lavrov? Why do you think Russia gets such an unbelievable pass in the becoming this traditional value country that everybody on the right in America needs to support?
Well, in the case of Tucker, I knew Tucker personally, and it's hard to figure out what he's after, and I don't know. Even knowing him personally, I'm a bit mystified on this. I do think part of it is this reflexive mood. Okay, well, if these guys support this, if these personalities stand for Ukraine, I'm going to do the opposite. But I think on this, why? So Russia, again, the KGB mentality. They listen to the mood of America, and they know what buttons to push, and they know Americans are longing for some sense of culture and tradition, and so Russia tries to fill the gap on that. and they can do it quite easily because no one tells us the story of Ukraine in a positive sense. I mean, even the CNN and BBC, and they don't understand culture and religion, and so that's why you never see reports about, in Lviv, Ukraine, for during Easter time, people don't say hello. They say Christ is risen in
Yeah.
Ukrainian. Christos voskres in the shops, in the cafes. It is that deeply religious, and that story never gets told. On the other side of Ukraine, in Kharkiv, where the Russians did a lot to destroy religion and culture, there's a revival of faith and tradition that's happening in this wartime. And I mentioned what a lovely city Kharkiv is, even though it's so close to Russia, even though it gets bombed all the time. And when Brett Baer of Fox News went to interview President Zelensky, Tucker interviewed Putin. I think this is 2023. I'm not sure. I think it was 2023 when Tucker interviewed Putin. Ukraine's response was to have Brett Baer interview Zelensky near the front line, and Brett stayed in a hotel in Kharkiv City.
It was
And I know this
2024.
because I
It
know
was
lots of
2024.
people.
I remember.
2024.
Yeah, it was.
And that's right, 2024. And I know a lot of people there, so I kind of knew what he was up to and where he stayed. And he stayed at the hotel. He never left the hotel except in the armored convoy to go do the interview. If he had left the hotel, he would have seen a few blocks away from there, one of the most beautiful, clean cities in Europe, full of life despite the war. But he never saw it. And so, in his report, in sort of the packaging of his interview with President Zelensky, he described how he took an armored car from Kyiv to Kharkiv, a nation under siege, under curfew. Yeah, he arrived at 3 o'clock in the morning, so of course it was a curfew.
Yeah.
And because he never stepped out of there and never saw the city, if you watch that report as an American, you would think that Kharkiv was Bakhmut. You would have no reason to see anything else. And I think this even applies to people in the White House. Like, everyone assumes that people have the information that we have, but you got stacks of intel, a lot of things to sort through. People don't realize that, even like in the White House, when they're talking about, okay, how do we find some solution here? I think there were people close to Trump thinking, okay, we'll protect Western Ukraine and maybe give up the East, but them, if you know Kharkiv, Ukraine, you know that the most defiant place in Ukraine, where still, probably 700,000 people live, is Kharkiv city. Kharkiv is less likely to surrender than Lviv.
It's unbelievable.
But these stories are not, they're not told. I tell them in my, my own little narrow space here, I guess, but they're not widely told. And so people don't see the positive side of Ukraine. Look at Pete Hegseth's video that he released, on Friday, about we're going to scale up drone production. We're going to be cutting edge on drones, and I see this all the time here. American defense contractors come here. They think they have the best. And when it comes to the big stuff, it's great, the Patriots and the ATACMS and HIMARS. But when it comes to the new technology and the drones, American kit does not work here because it's not adaptable. And the thing is, in Ukraine, when a drone doesn't work, if it's made in Ukraine, the frontline guys communicate to the people that make the drone, and within 24 hours, you can have a new product. America is not ready for that whatsoever. But I know for a fact that Pete Hegseth and people in the White House are absolutely unaware of the rapid innovation in drone technology and electronic warfare that's happening here. They're unaware of it, and part of that is because when defense contractors come here, they realize how their products don't work, and it would cause them to sort of change their entire business model. Ukrainians can do stuff on the cheap, which is a threat to the industry, and they develop very quickly. And so the defense contractors go back to the U.S. And they don't want to report what they actually saw here. Instead, they say, "Oh, our products are battle tested, and let's scale it up and let's build 100,000 of things that they know don't work." I would say the stories of Ukrainian culture, and it's sort of Ukrainian obsession with freedom and tradition, and also innovation. Matthew, those stories are not told very well, and so that's why Russia is able to fill that gap.
Well said. Well, we got to improve on that. Listen, one more on Tucker. My buddy Yael from the Consumer Choice Center, he just sent one in. I actually don't. I try to stay happy in life, so I don't watch Tucker. So I don't exactly know the context of this question. Maybe you do. He says, waiting for the thoughts on Tucker Carlson's contracts and, quote, contacts with certain dictatorships and what it says about alternative media in 2025. So I guess that's actually just a general question. Do you know, obviously he's friendly to Orban. There's a lot of questionable things going. This question might cross with your view of trying to be, reach out to the Trump people, because there are, Trump. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but Trump, he has these connections with Orban. He clearly thinks, as Bolton says, Putin is his friend and therefore Russia is his friend. I don't know. Let me see what else he has.
Well,
yeah, if you have any thoughts on that.
I mean, there are, there's questions of who pays who always, but you're right. It does cross with my approach, because I prefer to address the arguments on their merits, or the attempted arguments on their merits, because I'm not arguing with Tucker. I'm speaking to people who listen to Tucker, and so I mean, one of the things that Tucker says all the time, and that there's no religious freedom in Ukraine, and which is absurd. I mean, more people go to Orthodox, and there are stats on this. More people go to Orthodox church, like taking any given Easter Sunday in the past years. More people are in Orthodox church in Ukraine than in Russia. The Russians don't go to church. It was totally broken
100%.
By the Soviet Union. And that's why in Western Ukraine, you see religion is more active. They were able to resist during the Soviet times. But in the East, in places like Kharkiv and Dnipro, religion was broken the closer you get to Russia. But this is a very vibrant place. The only, the sort of the kernel of truth that the Russians and Tucker take to manipulate it is that, after almost 2 years of full-scale war, so it took a long time, the Ukrainian government finally started to make moves against the Moscow Orthodox Church, which is not recognized by the Ecumenical Patriarch in Constantinople. It's in schism with Orthodoxy. That point is never mentioned, and it is led by a former KGB, or you could say current in a way, but former KGB agent. And this is the church that was recreated by Stalin to spy, to exert pressure on the people. And now, just as the Chinese are buying farmland near American military bases, the Russians do the same with the Moscow Orthodox Church throughout Europe. We just did a report there in Sweden overlooking sensitive power plants and military facilities. There are Orthodox churches in the middle of nowhere where there's no Orthodox population, and so but Tucker has manipulated this, and notably he'll have guests on his show. Like there's a famous Catholic bishop, Robert Barron, who's very close to the Trump White House people, and they go on the show and they never challenge Tucker. And this is what it mystifies me. I mean, J.D. Vance is a convert to Catholicism, and he spreads these lies that the Ukraine is suppressing religion, when the fact is the most sort of traditional religious country in Europe, besides maybe Poland, is being bombed every day and being destroyed. And so when Tucker says this stuff, you know what, the best spin I can have on Tucker, and this is having known him, because he was at the Weekly Standard as well, and then also in the World of Fox, is that he's lazy and doesn't do his reporting at all. That's the best. That's the nice interpretation I can offer.
I would just second that again. I mean, there was a great report on France 24 English channel just recently about the same one of the churches in Sweden. One of my buddies in Sweden actually goes to one of those churches as the Bulgarian run. They try to be infiltrated many times. The Bulgarian Orthodox Church doesn't have any connection to the Russian, the Moscow Patriarch, and it's such a simple reflex knee-jerk reaction from these libertarians or hard right wingers, and it allows them. The thing is, it allows them to not think about the fight that Ukraine is really having, right? It's like, oh, well, they don't have freedom of religion there. I've heard it for years, Joe, for years, and I really try to not tune into these guys, but there are these, pretty loud libertarian voices now, folks like Dave Smith. He said it for years that Ukraine doesn't have freedom of religion. And that's because apparently he's some unbelievably consistent, principled libertarian, and he can just make a statement like, "Oh, Ukraine doesn't have freedom of religion. You better work on that. By the way, you're a corrupt country, and your war is not a just cause." Like, it's really incredible, and I myself am working on ways to break through to these people because I know, going back to what you're trying to do as well, some of this, the strategy is they're tired, they're fatigued, they don't want the forever wars, and they just think, Ukraine is like another war. One of the things I always try to say is, if you were against the Iraq war, and look, I didn't serve, I was in school at the time, I didn't serve, but, I had friends that served, and some of them, were supported, some didn't after coming back. And, for me, I was never supporting it, but whatever, I'm not Monday morning quarterbacking it. But if you are, or if you change your mind, you don't want a war of invasion. I mean, even George Bush said so much that the war was a mistake after he was well out of office. So, if you're against a war of invasion, I just do not see how you cannot be vehemently against a Russian war of invasion of a country that just wants their freedom. They're religiously tolerant. They're free. They truly are free. I mean, if you love being free and not having COVID mandates, you should love Ukraine. There are just so many layers to this. If you love Bitcoin, there's a lot of Bitcoiners in Ukraine. I know. There's so many layers that really work, but it's hard. It's really hard to break through. And I don't know. I don't know what other strategies you have.
Well, I think there's another. I mean, everything you say is true, but I think there's still, Americans even, they'll say, okay, that's nice, but why is it my business to care? And I say this to Ukrainians, in January of 2022, I was here, and Americans, who paid attention were telling Ukrainians, hey, you're going to get a full scale invasion, and no, people didn't want to believe it. And I remind Ukrainians of that because I said, if you can think about in January 2022, your own skepticism when Russia already was occupying part of your country, that Russia has hated your guts for a century, that they've tried to control your freedom, freedom as individuals. Russia's about the state, and Ukrainian has always been this horizontal society. And like Tocqueville, what he wrote about in America, that's here in Ukraine. And so Ukrainians, knowing all those things, still didn't want to believe that Russia would be a threat. So, and I say this to Ukrainians, remember your mentality then, and then how do you expect someone today in Topeka, Kansas or Malibu, California to give a damn, when they're across a continent and an ocean and another continent? Why would they care if you didn't care in January 2022? And if you can realize that, you could maybe find the key to persuading people far away that this does matter, that they need to wake up. And I think, I think this is where some people like Alexander Stubb, the president of Finland, is very good about this, but talking about what Ukraine offers, not only that it's something that should be defended because it's right and just. I don't think that's going to work for people initially. Those those people for whom that argument works already support Ukraine, but there is a very material benefit argument that I mean, Ukraine has the largest army in Europe. Just as Ukraine needs support, which maybe we're going to hear about in a few hours from the U.S. On these incredible weapons from the U.S. needs support on, for example, drone technology and drone warfare.
Yeah.
And it is drones that have enabled Ukraine to hold the line while they've been waiting for the bigger weapons. They can let them push the Russians back. We can go into detail of that now or sometime later, but there's a real benefit that Ukraine can offer. And then there's the trickiest thing is the counterfactual, but this is important to consider. If the Maidan Revolution had not happened, if Ukrainians had allowed themselves to be controlled by Russia, then here's the situation we would have today. You would have the largest country in Europe, Ukraine, with incredible natural resources, with incredible human resources. During the Soviet times, the engineers, the nuclear engineers, the top warriors, the top military guys, all came from Ukraine. So, if Ukraine had chosen to be governed and controlled by Moscow, now we would have a situation where Beijing and Moscow, and a little bit, with Iran, would have this incredible asset of Ukraine to do whatever they wanted to Europe and the West. And it's Ukrainians that have prevented that by refusing to submit to a tyrant. Ukrainians have refused to give their lives to be used by Beijing and by Moscow against the West. And that part of the story really gets missed because it's hard to see how much worse things could be if Ukraine didn't have a President Zelensky, if you or the Ukrainian people, because it's not about the president, it's about the people. If Ukraine was like Belarus, because it'd be much stronger than Belarus, and it would be a huge threat to the West. And
Yeah.
Ukrainians refuse to be that type of threat.
Yeah. Well said. That's unbelievable. And even more, I think, just to tie up what you said at the beginning, because that confuses people too, about how Ukrainians were ambivalent or just didn't want to believe the threat in January, February 2022 and end of 2021. They're just everyday people, right? I mean, everybody, people got to get along with their lives. They don't want to think about some of this stuff. I mean, myself being, abroad, hyper attuned to this stuff because my grandparents fled the Soviets after World War II, and during World War II, I should say, and we know that this threat is always going to be there. There's just no start date. There's no end date. It's always going to be there. But I think obviously going back what I was saying earlier, took about 20 years or so after the end of the Soviet Union for Ukrainians to really get there. They got there with Maidan, and now it's 11 years after that. There were plenty of Ukrainians on, the Atlantic Council's programs, talking very much about the threat that happened in end of 2021, 2022. But it's true. I mean, I had friends in Ukraine, and I was warning them, asking them, what are you doing? Are you worried and everything? And they were surprised. They were surprised on that morning in February 2022 that they actually went through with it. War, it's an unbelievable thing. And Russia knows. And I think particularly now. So anyway, I just wanted to say that because in case people were wondering, again, why should I care if even some Ukrainians don't care? It's not that they didn't care. It's just you got to go out about your daily life. And like you said, I mean, sometimes you just get bombed the hell every night with drones and missiles, and you still get up every morning, take care of your family, go to the same coffee shop. It's an unbelievable mentality what they have to work through right now, and they obviously need our support, anybody who's willing to help. Regarding some of these recent attacks, how have you noticed the change in their mentality? Because I can imagine it's pretty difficult. I mean, right now, for people that don't know, like Putin is really letting out all the stops. He completely wants to demoralize the situation. They want to go from, used to be a couple hundred drones a night, then it's like 500 drones a night. Now it's like 1,000, or they want to get up to 1,000 drones a night. They're not stopping.
No, it's getting more intense, and those especially twice in the past 10 days, as I mentioned, have been. I've been through a lot. I've been near the front lines. It's been the scariest attacks. Even people that are sort of hardened veterans, were very much uneasy. I mean, it sounded like Kyiv. It sounded like Kyiv was being destroyed with ballistic missiles and drones, and again nonstop for hours. And there's this weird duality because it's been beautiful summer days. All day. Kyiv is a lovely city. Some days we've had problems with air quality because of all the fires, but beyond that, the daytime. The outdoor cafes are busy. People are going to. I love walking or running in the morning. Kyiv has sort of this New York energy, but in a cleaner way. People, rushing to work, walking fast to work. The city's moving and full of energy, and then as you get closer to nightfall, you get this sick feeling. You're like, okay, what are we in store for tonight? And it's been real hell, the likes of which no one has seen here. And the Russians have tried this tactic of demoralizing cities. I mean, they've tried this with Kharkiv, and it doesn't work. I mean, I think the Russians still don't understand fundamentally that there can be people on this planet who actually want to live in freedom, and that they actually prefer freedom. They like freedom so much that they will face bombs for that. I know people. Anyone who lives in Kharkiv could live anywhere else in Ukraine. And there's people who choose to live there. I have friends who've had babies there in the wartime. People that have moved back there because that is their act of defiance. It is an insane devotion to this idea of freedom, and the Russians, because the Russian people, have never had that. They've tolerated tyrants for centuries. It's gone from their DNA. I mean, this is the deep damage of the Bolshevik Revolution. And so I think Russia still thinks that you can frighten people away, and it hasn't worked for 3 years. And I think now, these recent this new level of attacks on Kyiv, again, it's the likes of which we've not seen. Absolutely terrifying. I mean, it really shakes you to your core. I mean, if you, it's there's no way to put a nice spin on it. And uh, th- those attacks happened after Trump began to signal that he now sees Putin for who he really is. He said Putin is full of bullshit. He's always, that he's always been dishonest with Trump. Trump is now realizing what Margaret Thatcher, by the way, warned the world in 2000. She said Putin is a bad guy. Well, Trump's realizing that, and for really only a few days after that first signal of a change in Trump's mind is when Putin began to do these attacks. And perhaps it's his last ditch effort to push back. I mean, I follow on X two of Putin's biggest apologists in the Kremlin, Alexander Dugin and Kirill Dmitriev. Kirill is sort of the smooth business guy who's the envoy to Trump. It's very interesting to follow their tweets because you see them starting to get desperate now. They were sort of kissing up to Trump, and now they're getting a bit desperate. So I think we see that desperation in these attacks on Kyiv, and they still. The Russians still have this idea that they can break the spirits of the city, and that, that's not what you see. I mean, again, 8 o'clock in the morning, you can go to your regular coffee shop, you show up at your office, kids go to school, no snow day for missiles. And I see the spirit. People are tired, of course, but I do not see the spirit being broken. In fact, I see it's quite the opposite, actually, because a few months ago, there was a malaise here, really, really through like 2024 summer until a few months ago, there was a malaise. People were getting tired, and you see that the further away you get from the front,
Right.
like when you go to the city of Lviv in the west, uh, more people there were willing to have some kind of deal or negotiations because they weren't in the immediate crossfire, and you just become depressed because your options are limited. But with these recent attacks, the spirit of 2022 has been reawakened here, including, by the way, in that city of Lviv, which has been spared a lot in this war from direct attacks. I mean, it's still affected in many ways, but the Russians pounded this beautiful UNESCO-protected, historical, deeply Catholic, Greek Catholic city of Lviv over the weekend. They pounded Lviv in the worst attack on that city since the beginning, and it's very close to the Polish border. It looks like the Russians are realizing that this is maybe their last chance to destroy that which they can't have.
Okay, just a couple more for you, Joe. Still in the spirit of reaching across the aisle or just reaching to anybody that wants to help Ukraine, I can't help but feel extremely jaded and sad for Ukrainians, even with everything that you just said and the spirit that is back, because it has to be. When it was Biden, it was in office, and we talked about that at the top of the show, and the Hunter Biden affair and everything. But the delays in the weapons, it was literally that people talk about the Russia's red lines, which have obviously all been crossed and still no. Russia continues like a rat in a corner, going to say, "Oh, we have this nuclear deterrent, and we're going to use it." They're not going to use it in Ukraine, right? They're not going to, regardless of what happens, they're not going to use it. And NATO, honestly, could have, even if it was Ukraine operating NATO weapons, could have kicked Russia out in a matter of weeks, months. I still believe that in 2022, if we had given them max support, max weapons, air superiority, all the rest. But people forget, and people think that the United States has sort of been there always. No, they weren't. With Biden, it was a drip, literally a drip feed of weapons. So slow. So, the U.S. had red lines too, was my point. So like Russia had the red lines, U.S. red lines. Yeah. The U.S. crossed all those red lines. They gave them all the weapons. The most embarrassing of was the max long-range weapons into Russia at the very end of Biden's term before Trump took over. But then, of course, we have Trump who comes in, I started to say this at the top of the show, but didn't want to get into it, but now I will. Obviously, Trump has been wrong in everything here. I mean, he's totally misjudged Putin, as John Bolton says, who I agree with in this point in particular. When Trump thinks someone is his friend, he thinks that that's like a friendship with the country. He thinks that about Putin. And nothing about what Trump did surprised me in many ways, actually, this Trump administration. Finally, I think the hard right people are getting exhausted because of the Epstein files conundrum. Just, you know, dithering and obviously going to be sweeping under the rug. But going back to just specifically Ukraine, nothing surprised me. I mean, Trump said he was going to try to do it. He said from saying he's going to end it in 24 hours to saying at the very beginning, you might remember this quote. He said, "I think I have the power to end this war." He said, "I know I have the power to end this war." And then he said, Zelensky's a dictator. He said Zelensky shouldn't have started the war. Then he humiliated Zelensky in the Oval Office. Vance, in the most just disgusting way, piled on. And then the same thing. I mean, it was the 2 weeks. It's like the coder, you know, it's going to be done in 2 weeks. So that whole thing went through. We've done it now. And okay, we're on a quicker time frame with the Biden than the Biden administration. But maybe finally there's an announcement day. Maybe finally. But honestly, I'm not holding my breath, Joe. I'm not holding my breath. I know how this goes. The United States, you know, Kissinger said it's the only thing worse than being an ally of the United States is being worse than being an enemy is being an ally. You know, Russia and United States are still peers. Russia is a very terrible near peer, but they're a peer of the United States. Ukraine's not a peer, doesn't have nuclear weapons. They've been just welched on every agreement, as you said, since the 90s for the U.S. to protect. But I'm not optimistic about American help here. So in the spirit of, again, reaching out and what might happen here with this bill, or just individual Americans donating. I always say they can donate Bitcoin. I can drop links in the show note where you can donate Bitcoin. You can donate any currency. You know, what are you saying? Because I am just like a regular Bitcoiner. I am disgusted with the leadership on both sides. I think, although for me it's much more personal, aiding Ukraine, and I have friends there, I can understand, again, when people are in the West, like you said, sitting in Wyoming or Idaho or California, like, why should I care about Ukraine? They've been let down by both Biden and Trump. None of it is a surprise to me. Where do we go from here? How are we going to help them continue to defend themselves?
Well, I think, you know, you mentioned Kissinger, who, when I worked in for Ailes in New York, I used to go to Yankee games with Kissinger, and I
Wow.
think one thing that that Ukrainians represent, the Ukrainians are breaking through that uniparty worldview as espoused by Kissinger, who actually said that Russia was necessary in the global equilibrium. And this is the controllers who would prefer to manage things than to have freedom, because freedom is messy, and Ukrainians are on the side of freedom. And so, and this is what America, I think when Americans realize that, they'll want to stand with them, because if you oppose the Kissinger school of foreign policy, then you would side with the Ukrainians. And I think this is, you know, like, and I tell, whatever announcement happens today, I tell Ukrainians, don't be complacent, because uh it's just words. As we know, we've had words going back to the Budapest Memorandum, the Biden administration. And I think, the you pro Ukraine people need to help Trump uh make the case to MAGA why Ukraine can win, and why Ukraine really is a peer of the U.S. when it comes to freedom, when it comes to innovation, including Miltech innovation. That case has to be made vociferously, and it's not made. I think, this, like, that. Don't We can't assume that they actually know all, these details in the White House. It's quite clear to me that people. I don't know if there's anyone in the White House, and I have some connections around there, who's aware of what Ukraine has done in the Black Sea. Ukraine is exporting more grain to the Black Sea now by fighting back than when they had the deal brokered by the United Nations. That's
It's
extraordinary.
unbelievable.
It's only by fighting back that they've made the Black Sea safer. They destroyed a third of Russia's navy. They don't know that. I mean, Steve Witkoff was referring to Ukrainian ships in the Black Sea. They don't exist. It's drones. And so we have to really, we can't assume that people don't know this stuff. The case of looking at Putin's nuclear red lines, I think one of the most instructive stories of Biden timidity and Biden failure that has put Ukraine in a negative light is what happened in Kharkiv in May of 2024. So just over a year ago, the Russians were doing kind of what they're doing to Kyiv now. They were making it, they were hitting Kharkiv something like 3 times a day, trying to destroy the city, trying to make people flee, to make it easier so that they could take the city. And they had moved into the Kharkiv region for the first time since 2022. And part of this was because Ukraine, Biden had slowed down on the aid, and so we began to lose territory that Ukraine had taken back, and Kharkiv was being destroyed. And there was a simple single chorus from pro-Ukraine people, including Zelensky, begging the Biden administration to do something. And there's two things to realize here. One, with Biden and whoever was in charge, Autopin, whatever you want to say, Hunter Biden, like Grimer, warm tongue, whispering into the king's ear, whatever it was. With Biden, you could beg for help, and if there was enough public pressure, a little bit of help would arrive. That doesn't work with Trump. You have to have a totally different approach. That's the first thing to keep in mind. But Ukraine was and the world was imploring Biden to let Ukraine use American weapons to hit Russians on Russian soil, because Kharkiv is so close to Russia. If you didn't do that, Russia could attack with impunity. I mean, basically, the Biden administration and Jake Sullivan had created a safe space for Russia to attack, because Russia knew that no one was, that they were, they could not be hit with any powerful American weapons, and so they could do it with impunity. And so finally, it was, I think, the last day of May 2024, the administration gave permission to use HIMARS, American weapons, to hit Russians on Russian soil. This was probably the biggest nuclear red line from Putin. If you look at all of the threats he's made, this was it, the biggest one. And guess what? Ukrainians started to attack the Russian positions, the launch positions on Russian soil with American weapons. And here's what really did not get reported. What happened in June of 2024, the next month? Kharkiv was barely attacked. There were no attacks for 3 months. So you went from 3 attacks a day to no attacks for 3 weeks. Why? Because the Russians had to move their launch points deeper into Russia and to reset. And so we see there that it was possible to cross this major red line, that it actually made Ukraine, in particular Kharkiv, safer. It defended the city, and that Russia was in a weaker position. But then the third part of it is that would have been the time, if you had competent leadership in the White House, to triple down, quadruple down, give Ukraine more tools with Russia on its heels, and push to get a victory. And instead, no one did anything. They just sat. The media didn't even report on how safe Kharkiv became, because the absence of a problem is not an exciting headline. We weren't bombed today. Doesn't become a headline. So that whole story was missed. And I guarantee you, Matthew, that people in the White House don't know about that. They don't even know, even General Kellogg, who loves Ukraine, I don't think he's aware of stories like this that would actually be very influential were he to say them at the cabinet table or in the Oval Office.
100%. And that's that idea about fighting back, or even fighting back on the enemy territory. It has to happen if you're attacked. This again, I think, goes to this just weird in a vacuum theory that a lot of these hard right now libertarian folks sort of think about, is that, what would, you just can't attack on Russian soil. Well, what are you going to do? I mean, they're 20 miles from Russian soil. I mean, you have to attack. You have to fight back. The defense minister of Estonia said as much in September of 2024, this past year. He said, look, what if Russia puts 200,000 troops on our border of Narva, just like they did with Ukraine? We are going to strike. We're going to strike St. Petersburg. What do you want us to do? Just let them come over and invade us? I mean, this is the thing that people don't understand what Russia is doing right now. They are out for blood. We have an alliance. We need to defend it. And yes, Ukraine isn't in that alliance, but even if they're outside of the alliance, they're clearly aligned with our values, and they're just absolutely free people, and they're not going to give up. So Yeah, I don't know. Again, I sound strident when I say these things, but I'm trying to get it across that, this is just not the way that Tucker Carlson is telling you.
Well, we have empirical evidence that you can strike on Russian territory, and again, things get better for a little while until Russia buys time. I mean, when Ukraine made the incursion into Kursk, the Biden administration was clearly not pleased about it, and Russia was weakened for a time. In fact, Russia was so weakened they had to turn to the dog eating nation of North Korea for help. I mean, that's how bad it was. But Russia did that, and it got to a stronger position. And so we have these ups and downs because we keep having these missed opportunities. And I think, I would sort of predict, my prediction would be that, whatever is said today, if it's a strong statement from General Kellogg of support for Ukraine, real serious package, maybe at the very least defensive weapons to protect the cities, whatever it is, the Russians are going to have to do something. They're going to have to figure out how to respond. And I think the first response is going to be on the information level. And, I mean, I think that, if you're a Russian, information person in the Kremlin, what's the best story to start pushing these past weeks? If you want to cause trouble for Trump, Epstein, because when Trump made that attack, the surgical attack, you could say, on Iran, that was the first time he had a MAGA rebellion because a lot of people were like, wait, we didn't vote for foreign wars. That rebellion has calmed down because I think things went pretty well there. JD Vance was dispatched to make the case, and that calmed the rebellion down. But when Trump is now, saying he might support Ukraine, that's a tougher sell for all the reasons we went into, and no wonder now he's got the Epstein fire, which had been quiet for a while, and so now Trump has to consider, and the Russians are, they moved the chess pieces. Can Trump support Ukraine and keep his current position on not releasing those files? And the Russians are betting that he's going to have to pick one or the other. That it'd be too unpopular, and so this is something really to pay attention to. And this is why for the Ukrainians, I mean, you know, the some of the people around Zelensky are perfectly capable of scoring own goals. People are tired, and also they don't understand America. Some of the political elites here, and they're perfectly capable of scoring own goals as they have before. Sometimes when it comes to dealing with Trump, they have to realize that Trump is not Biden. Respect the choices of the American people, and communicate with Trump. And the main thing is to help give Trump the arguments that he can use to sell the story of Ukraine to the American people. And Trump sees that that Putin's a bad guy. He sees that now, and he feels bad for Ukraine, but he doesn't know these points I've laid out about Ukraine's strong faith and freedom and tradition and innovation. These stories aren't told, and I even saw this when Ben Shapiro came here to Ukraine, which I helped organize. He he wanted when he interviewed President Zelensky, he was trying to give him questions that would appeal, whose answers would appeal to MAGA, and I don't think I don't think that Zelensky's team understood that or felt that, and so Shapiro, when he told the story of Ukraine in that interview, in the packaging of that interview, he focused more on why Russia has to be stopped. And he didn't have sort of the positive stories to share from Ukraine. And I think that is the challenge for Ukrainians now to help Trump have these stories that he can share with the American people, because the Russians and others are really going to try to make life as difficult as possible for Trump if he does decide to support Ukraine.
Wonderful words, Joe. Listen, I think we can probably end it there for today. Any other final thoughts, any other final recommendations, any places to go to donate, what you're doing, where to follow you?
Yeah, well, Matthew, thanks for this conversation. You can follow me at JP Lindsley here on X and on Instagram, and as well as YouTube. Put a focus on X and Instagram at JP Lindsley. And my team and I are reporting every day, creating videos, helping people to understand some of like the Burisma perspectives, the innovation that's happening here. So especially if you are in favor of Ukraine already, we try to provide a lot of resources that you can share with people to help them understand what's happening here. And Yeah, and I welcome tough questions and criticisms at any point. So I'm committed to staying here. To every time I decide I want to take a break, there's too much happening here. So I'm committed to staying here. Especially these next weeks and months, to try to help people in America understand what is really happening here, and what's at stake. So at JP Lindsley on X. And then if you want to support us, you can go to my website, howaboutfreedom.com, howaboutfreedom.com, and support our effort. Thanks for this conversation.
Do you accept Bitcoin?
You know what? That function might be broken on the site. We were hacked, and it was this is something I need to sort out this week.
I can.
So this is a good reminder to do.
I can help you with that, and also put you in touch with smarter coders than me. Can help you with that. Definitely, it's a great way.
Great, because I lost my website, and so we just rebuilt this sort of temporary one while we focused on lots of other stuff here. But I think like everyone here, I mean, my team and I, Ukrainians and Americans and Poles and others, we also are all, when we can, we're buying drones and drone enhancement devices for our friends at the front. So we welcome support for sure. Howaboutfreedom.com and at JP Lindsley.
All right.
And yeah, I'd appreciate the Bitcoin advice.
No, we'll put it in the show notes and everything. No, but Bitcoin's getting around. I mean, it's freedom money. When I was in Maidan in 2014, there are QR codes everywhere. They're accepting even then. And Bitcoin is a very young currency. It was only 5 years old at the time. So, Ukraine's freedom movement is actually, you gotta talk to some Bitcoin geeks to fully understand it. But it's been a part of it in the whole time. And it's, I've donated lots of money in Bitcoin to Ukraine, and it's just no one's going to stop you from donating to do that. But you do have to take care of the keys, take care of the funds, so we can put you in touch with some people maybe to help you there as well. So, but listen,
great. Well, thank you, Matthew, for this conversation.
Yeah, Joe, thank you so much. Really like the cut of your jib. I really appreciate everything you're doing, and I really respect it. And thanks for talking, and let's definitely do it again sometime.
100%. I look forward to that. Thank you.
All right, Joe. Take care, man.